Why, hi there, it's me, it's Ron, and a listener, viewer, someone I interact with, asked me a question, and I'm going to try and answer it. He asks if you were able to. Well, actually, I could just read the question because goodness knows that would be the right thing to do. Thought provoking question is how he labels this. And Major League Baseball team says, we fired our broadcast team. Uh-oh. We want you to oversee the hiring process for the new guys. What's my plan of attack? What do I look for? Where do you look for it, etc.? Okay, this really isn't something I can write about, so I'm going to just do it as a video. All right, so I'm assuming that he means a local MLB team and not necessarily ESPN, Fox, or TBS, which would be an entirely different approach altogether. So I'm going to assume that it's a moderately successful team in a market that baseball does well in. But to be fair, even in markets where the team doesn't necessarily do all that well, in the summertime, the major league product is the most watched product on television in that area. They may not be interested in what Baseball Night in America is, or Sunday Night Baseball, or Tuesday nights on TBS, or whatever, but people do watch their own teams, and in a higher number than watch the usual summer reality show reruns and what have you on our 19,000 channel universe and Netflix and YouTube and all that. So baseball, despite the fact it's no longer the number one television sport on a national level, or even number two at this point, holds up rather well in for your own team, unless you're really bad or there's lots of other things going on. So let's say Northeastern team. I'm not going to say Red Sox, but let's just say in an area. I'm thinking as I was trying to figure this out in my head, an area where baseball does well. And the first thing I would do is I would not hire myself. I don't think that the type of play-by-play work I do in an internet stream does all that well for real life. It's much too jokey, it's much too interactive, and gets away from what I think the game should be. Is you should be a guide for the game, but you need to straddle that fine line of not being the story. There are several who did that very, very well over the years, and there's several that I think do it quite well now. I'm going to start with Gary Cohen with the Mets. I think does a very good job of doing what he has to do, getting his opinions in when they're needed, and getting the heck out of the way, and letting his colorman Keith Hernandez and Ron Darling do the work. I think that is I think the best team right now on the East Coast where you can see. But if I was to start from afresh, there'd be a couple things that I would want to make clear to begin with. One, I want to hire someone that has some experience in improv and is also a good writer. Although I'm not saying that someone needs to write the weekly blog entry about, oh, we got into the hotel at 3 a.m. again after the long trip. But you are going to be talking to an audience for 2.5 to 3 hours a night, maybe as much as 140, 150, 155 times a year. If you're a good team that does well on a national basis, you're not going to get as many games, which is get to the next point I want to make. But day in and day out, you're going to be featured on a lot of different nights. And you got to know what to do when the team is going well. That's the easy part. You get a good game, that's the easy part. I want to know how you fill the time when you got a blowout. When it's 6-0 in the second inning, it is about 10 minutes after 8, and you're going to be on the air for another 2.5 hours. The main objective of any television broadcast is to sell the advertising. Yes, you are representing a generic major league team, but it is your job to keep your audience entertained so they can get all the ads for the lumber companies, the car companies, Budweiser, Coca-Cola, or Pepsi, or whatever it is, because that's what keeps this stuff on the air is the advertisers. And if you're boring or don't know what to do or just full of shtick, you aren't going to keep that audience there. So that's why I think having good writing skills and good improv skills are important, because you do this without a net. Yes, you also have to learn how to prepare. And I do need, if I was auditioning someone, I'd want to know about Bud Black, if he was the pitcher, about how well he got along with his pitching coach in high school or whatever story you can dig up. I want to see that you can do the research, because especially if it's a kid coming up in the field as far as a player, I want you, the broadcaster, to be able to get me hooked into what I'm watching. You have to give me a reason to care. And I think that kind of gets lost, especially on a national basis, on whatever. Now, it doesn't mean I want to hear the sob story of how he pulled a splinter out of his sister's thumb when he's 4 and she was 2. Who cares? The sister does, and it makes him a good brother and a good person, all that. But as far as that's concerned, it really isn't what I'm after. The paradox of baseball on television is it's a passive sport. And so for whoever I want to hire, that person needs to be able to get the viewer's attention for snippets of time, not necessarily from the first pitch or the sign on. Hi, my name is Ron Juckett. Welcome to the program at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and hold you breathlessly until the game's over at 10:15. That's just not going to happen. You're going to be doing the dishes. You're going to be talking to your kids. You're going to be going to the bathroom. You're going to be doing a lot of other things while that game is on television, because baseball is a marathon. It's 162 games. It is not football. I do not need your rapt attention from the kickoff at 1:01 to the final gun at 4:10. And some days you get blowouts. Some days you get good games. So the main function for anyone is broadcasting is writing. You're writing a story. You're dictating it. You're not sitting there making sure that your punctuation is all right. It really doesn't matter how good of a speller you are when it comes to that. But for the 2 or 3 moments on a full count, or when there's runners on base, you need to be able to let the picture tell the story, but be guided along so people know what they're looking at. I am kind of in between how much of a sabermetric person you need to be. Obviously, there are some people who love the win shares and the OPS pluses and all that. I don't really think that makes for a very good general television broadcast, because your audience, even though it's on cable and is looking for you, as opposed to, again, a national game where it's just on, isn't necessarily going to be concerned about what the zone rating is for the shortstop. A 9-year-old kid isn't really going to care about that unless numbers are his thing. This is stuff that wasn't on the back of a baseball card when I was a kid, and the last time I bought Topps cards a few years ago, it wasn't the stuff that was on there. You don't want to lose your listener trying to be too cute with things. I think that they've done an okay job with launch angle. I do find the bat speed or the ball speed off the bat interesting to know. We've heard about pitching speeds for a long time, and launch angle, if you don't overuse it, I think is fine. And you go back to the 80s, and the IBM tail of the tape. How far did that home run go? Okay, that's something that everyone can relate to. But if you go further in the weeds as far as anything extra, I think OPS is fine and slash lines and all that, but don't shove it down people's throats. Explain why it's important. What is the difference? Be open to be talking about on base percentage being a better statistic than batting average per se, and explain it, casually why every once in a while. But don't sit there and denigrate stats that people have known for years. We know that RBI isn't necessarily as important as it should be, and in heavens knows, one loss percentage is for a pitcher, or wins and losses just, is overrated. But I think that people who do adhere to more modern stats want to get kind of poo-poo the things. And look, we all know how a triple crown is won in both batting and pitching. We know that it's the best batting average, the most home runs, and the most RBI. That is a point that can be made to anyone who's watching. You can kind of go in and talk about OPS plus and go with that. And it's like, well, he has an OPS plus of 124, which means he's a 24% better hitter than the league average. I think that, if you're going to go into advanced stats, you got to make it so that anyone can kind of pick up on it. That would be my thing. So again, a good writer, a good improv person, because one of the things, especially on a national broadcast, that happens is that storylines are kind of preordained. What happens? Can Mike Trout ever make the playoffs? Or why is so-and-so in a huge slump, or all that? And it kind of gets away from the fact that every game in itself tells a story, and you kind of have to let that breathe. If the fifth pitcher on the staff, or the opener, who maybe you've used 2 or 3 times only for a couple innings, has to go 5 innings, that becomes a story. And if he starts to pitch well, then that's when you kind of go in there and go, Harvey Wallbanger hasn't thrown more than 3 innings in a start all year long, but he's pitching well in the 4th, and you know what? He's kept his pitch count down, and he's kept other batters off balance. He's not nibbling around the plate. A good play-by-play man today on television needs to not overstate the obvious, but kind of enhance the experience. So I would kind of go through and hire a younger man or woman, depending on what her level of acumen is. If she is good, well, anybody is good with the history of the team. If you have, again, I'm going to use Gary Cohen as an example because he started at a young age. He also interned on the air with Bob Murphy on Mets radio, and what better way to do that than with a Hall of Famer? That's not always going to be the case. So if you are calling your hometown team, Cohen's a good example. Kruk and Kuip in San Francisco are good examples. Having a sense of how the team stands in the community and the history of it as a natural thing is going to come across a lot better than just a hired hand. I think that's what makes it difficult for national announcers to come in and swoop in and hold an audience. I think that's where the local broadcasters have. I would go with a young person for the job, maybe even fresh out of school or a couple years of minor league experience, maybe away from the organization, so they can learn to be objective and not get too emotional and all that. Because over the course of a generation, the broadcaster, whether it's on television or radio, becomes the most identifiable figure with the team. It's one of the things that the Red Sox have not quite understood. Yes, Sean McDonough's ego may or may not have cost him the job before, but the Red Sox chased away Don Orsillo. And Don Orsillo and Jerry Remy were a very good combination for the team. They knew when to be serious, and when Remy had to actually do analysis of games, he was fantastic. But when they were silly, you get your YouTube moments. And again, the whole point of any broadcast is to get you to shop the sponsor. Well, that's why the Red Sox had the Shaw's broadcast booth, and Joe Castiglione talks about picking up melons at 69 cents a pound or whatever, because that's what keeps these things going. So a fandom of the team you're covering and not being the hired hand would be one thing that I would look for. If I was in the Midwest where homers are probably a little more prominent, I would want someone from the Midwest to be calling the game. I'm not sure I'd ever hire do what the Cubs did with Harry Carey. Remember, he did the Cardinals for years on radio and television before moving to the South Side, before moving to the Cubs. But it worked because Harry was older and a professional. So going back to hiring the younger broadcaster between 25 and 30, I want to groom that person to be the voice for 15, 20, 25, 30 years. They are that person is the one that's going to tell you the story of all the good nights when they had the walk-off wins and kind of commiserate with you when they had the bad nights, either the walk-off loss or the blowout or the night where the ace pitcher stinks up the place, because it happens once or twice a year. They're going to understand and know how eventually to relate that to you without giving hot take city. I also would want a color person to be able to do some play-by-play. Although I do my streams solo for the most part, I've had color people for football. Gardner and I work well together. Al, Red Sox fan, and I think work well together. But in baseball, it really is a connection between whoever is talking and whoever is listening. And so, yes, it's not the same as it was, 40 years ago. All right, Howard, why did that double play not work? I want that color guy to be just as relatable a ball player. I'm thinking of Buck Martinez off the top of my head. He's not a great play-by-play man, but he's serviceable. Ron Darling is serviceable, and I think it makes the color guy appreciate the job the play-by-play guy does, and the play-by-play guy can give some analysis. Oh my goodness, he popped up with the bases loaded. And the producer in your ear is going, oh, it's the fifth time he's done that in the last 3 weeks, and oh, that's terrible, and blah, 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 blah. But again, if you look at some of the more successful teams in broadcast history, I'll look at Harry Kalas and Richie Ashburn. They both did radio and television. They both did play-by-play and color. And that would be the next thing I would do. I would want my radio teams and television teams to work in concert with each other. I don't understand why, for instance, Joe Castiglione doesn't do a few innings of television. Maybe not every night or something like that, but if you go back to the Braves, when they were trying to establish themselves on the national stage, when they were horrible back in the mid-'80s, you had Skip Carey and Pete Van Wieren as one team, Ernie Johnson Sr. and John Sterling, of all people, as the other set, and they would do 4.5 innings on television and 4.5 innings on radio. Len Casper would do an inning on radio every once in a while for the Cubs. Len would be my ideal broadcaster, again, as a hire. A good young-sounding voice, certainly cared about what the Cubs did or didn't do. He had a good report with his color man, and again, let the story tell itself. And obviously, you want the team you're calling to win ball games. Vin Scully rooted for the Dodgers. He also gave credit to where credit was due. So if Willie Mays made a fantastic catch in center field, or someone was able to turn a good double play or have a good game against the Dodgers, he didn't root against them, but you can root for that team. So, again, you don't want too much of a homer, but you don't want to be, if you don't want to be a color or play-by-play guy, never watch anything of Ken Harrelson, because it all turned around to be all about him, and that's not what you want. Where do I look for it? I'm looking for, again, fresh out of college with a variety of sports. If you called college baseball or high school baseball on YouTube, I'm looking there. I want to see what you did for the teams that you rooted for. Were you measured in your rooting for, or were you just a downright homer? if you're a former player looking to get in the broadcast booth, I don't really care what you look like. Although, Jerry Remy, FB San Angelo, uh, Keith, well, people like Keith Hernandez and Ron Darling, Paul O'Neill, Ken Singleton. Again, no one was ever going to ask Kenny Singleton to do a jockey shorts ad, okay, like Jim Palmer. How easy is it for a color guy or someone that had played to look into a camera or talk into a microphone? You only have a few seconds. One of the things that doesn't come across in a broadcast is that when you're actually covering the game, things go fast when you're in person. It's a whole different animal watching on TV because you're focused on what the camera is showing you and all that. So for a colored person, I want to know, how well do you react in the situation? What kind of insight can you give me? Well, it was a hard ground ball to second, Harvey, is not necessarily good analysis. But, here's something that Dustin Pedroia could get to that most other second basemen couldn't get to. He read the play well, and he read the scouting report well, and knew that Reggie Jackson pulled the ground to his left, and so he shaded him towards the left, and blah 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 blah. Again, get in, get out, and let the game tell the story. Again, as a team gels together, they're going to have stories to tell, and that's you want to be personable. I mean, you are, again, 150 games at 3 hours a pop. Some people are going to be spending as much as 450 hours a year with you. That's more time than you spend with a cousin, or maybe even a wife or a spouse if you work a lot. You're spending a lot of time with that. Again, you're not necessarily going to be buying the Coors or the Pepsi or the lottery tickets that are thrown at you ad nauseum. But again, you want to be, I suppose, you want to spend time with people that you want to have a beer with. What else would I do for a plan of attack? I would have no sideline reporter. I do not think baseball needs sideline reporters. It's just another voice that's going to throw in a distracting story away from what you're seeing. You don't need it. If you need to do the fluff stories, for goodness sakes, you got an hour pregame show for most of these things. You don't need to do an hour pregame show for a game in May between the A's and the Rangers, okay? There's only so many times you can talk about how someone's going to pitch. Now, again, that would be where I would try to find my color people from the booth. How well do you act when you have endless time to fill? And if you need the person to go and tell me about the grasshoppers you can buy fried in Seattle, or about the time that John stubbed his toe in the shower and his remarkable comeback story, that's the time to do it, when people aren't really paying attention. They want to hear from the team insider and all that. Unless there is an injury of some sort, why did so-and-so get pulled from the game? That probably is the only time I would want to hear from that. And you know who can do that? The press officer for said team. And so Joe Schmo, who is the press intern for the Red Sox, tells us that Ron had a blister on his index finger. He doesn't need to spend any time on the injury list, but his next start will depend on how well they can get that under control. That's it. Go to the next part of the game. So that would be my plan of attack. I would have 3 or 4 people. I would rotate them every once in a while between radio and television, radio being an entirely different ballgame. I want my play-by-play guy to be able to lay out. The pictures are in front of you on television. The crowd noise is in your ear on television. You can see someone scratching their nether regions or taking a few practice cuts. But on radio, you need to know how hard that ball was hit, and was it a good play, and where are the outfielders shaded to left or right, or where the flag is going. Tell me stuff that I don't necessarily see. I mean, one of the things, again, going back to Bob Murphy with the Mets on the radio, was he's painting a word picture. And I want, again, it goes back to being a good writer. How do you describe what you are seeing when someone else can't necessarily see it? I would leave the color person for television. I'm not sure you really need a color person for radio. I think, again, the intimacy of just hearing that one voice. There's some very good color people on radio. Will Fleming for the Red Sox. I listened to the Astros broadcasters. I can't name them during the playoffs in the World Series, and they counteracted quite well on the radio. You give something, well, Bob only hit 215 against Verlander over his career in 105 at bats. That's something you want to know, but you don't need to say that. Again, Dave Gardner, who is a big fan of pork chops, when he has the pork chop special at the Olive Garden, he is 4-0 on the year with an earned run average of 235. I mean, okay, it's interesting for that. So that, I guess, would be my plan of attack. Use my crews both on radio and television. Maybe not every time, but bring him in for a couple innings. And I do expect the one weakness I found in Jerry Remy was that he did not do any play-by-play. I think Susan Waldman is quite capable of doing a couple innings of play-by-play on Yankee radio. I don't think she'd be bad at it. In fact, I think she'd be quite good at it. She's only covered the team since 1987. And a look at my calendar says it's 2023. She's qualified to do whatever she wants with the New York Yankees as long as she feels comfortable in doing it. So, yeah, I want my broadcast crew to be versatile on both mediums of radio and television. And if they were to do maybe a few streams where you bring in someone to do the sabermetric broadcast, because there are stat junkies out there who like that sort of thing all the time. And again, I need to realize that my audience is going to be constantly coming in and out of a game, that I'm not sure that even half the people who come in at 7 o'clock are watching at 10:15 and vice versa. And especially on the radio, you put it on the radio, you're playing cards, you're mowing the lawn, you're going running back and forth to the grocery store, you might be listening to 2 or 3 games on your app, going back and forth to whoever's doing the commercials and such. So again, I want to look at people who do have some experience, minor league experience, or some college experience, or even some high school experience. There's one guy that got hired from calling games on the internet, sports streams, the games. Elon Olaf got a job calling high school stuff because A, he had the set of pipes, and B, fundamentally, he was very good. You kind of grow into a job when you do that, and you start to tell the stories. But again, I want the person, if I'm reaching out to you at 25 years old and say, look, you grew up in Philadelphia, you know about Harry and Whitey, you had your feelings about Andy Musser and Chris Wheeler, you know that John Kruk is going to be in the booth. How would you like to call the Phillies? How can I make you anyone to hire? I want you to be the household name. I want you to be the Bill Campbell, the By Sam, the Merrill Reese for football, the Harry Callis if you go in any other city, to that. Because you become the spokesman for the team. You're the one, I made the jokes a lot about Farmer John and Vin Scully. Go get your Dodger dog, and don't forget, the Padres are coming in for 3. Call 1-800-DODGERS now to get your tickets, and it's a 2-1 now to Bill Russell. That sort of thing. You are the spokesman. Doesn't mean you can't be critical. I want you to be critical within reason if I'm hiring you. But if you got, let's say, Carl Crawford in left field for the Boston Red Sox in a $120 million wasted contract, I don't want to hear you say, that son of a bitch, he didn't chase down that ball again. That's not what's going to sell tickets. So there's a lot of different roles to play. But I think the most important one is you got to love what you do. Baseball is a marathon, and a lot of the time it doesn't go your way. And so if I was to point to a team that I think in the past that could have done a better job would be the Pirates, because all they did was try to sell the team. Yeah, we know we're not very good, but, eat the Cons wieners and blah, 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 blah. No, no. Again, it's a balancing act. So once again, good writer, decent improv at improv. I mean, look at today's game show hosts. That would be the other thing I do. Go back and watch talk shows, not Jimmy Fallon, because that's not what you want. Go back and look at how Conan O'Brien handled guests. Go look at how Letterman handled his guests. If you like Jay Leno, go back and do that, although Leno did too much homework, I think, and wasn't all that funny. Go back and why was Carson the best at what he did? Sometimes he had tight reins and sometimes he just let it go, and you got to know when to do that and when not to do that. Are you sparse with the play-by-play? Go back and watch Ray Scott and Pat Summerall do it. Learn from other sports. I think the one sport that I follow that has the best calling the local sports is hockey, because I think they are the most passionate about the sport, and it's a whole different ballgame. You're going at a fast pace and trying to get stories. In baseball, you got a lot of time to fill, and so I guess that's what I would do. Maybe two crews that may be interchanged on different nights or whatever, or a couple innings here and a couple innings there on that, and again maybe do some stat-based games on the internet where you can stream for free to do that. But again, be congenial. I don't want anyone to be combative, and I certainly don't want anyone to be doing hot takes. There's plenty of time to do hot takes. That's why you have every major market has several 24/7 sports talk radio things that talk about gambling and fantasy and boobs and what didn't go wrong. You got to be likable and you got to be genuine. People are going to be able to tell if you're faking it. And you got to be able to withstand the good times and the bad times, and if I've hired the right person, you're going to go through good times and bad times. I hope that answers your question. Now, why would I not hire myself? I don't think I do. You got to be able to read. There's always ads. And you got to be able to think quick and not stumble over your words and all that. And I think that's just, there's a part of being a showman that you have to do to keep people interested on the internet. And considering that the game isn't real to begin with, I just don't think that I could do that for 3 hours day in and day out. That I would be the best fit for that, and of course travel and all that, which is why I do these on the internet and have a good time doing it. So, but that style of dipping into the chat, answering Twitter questions, which I've seen done on television, the focus, in my view, needs to be on the game. The people that have been the most successful in broadcasting baseball have been able to find that balance of what's going on the field. How can I explain it to the person that's watching? Again, you're going to have diehards and you're going to get those stuck at the party watching the game. How do I make it interesting? Same as retail. Any idiot can come into my store. I want you to come back. And I think that's a job of the broadcaster. He or she represents the team probably more than anybody else, unless you have the rare exception of a David Ortiz, a Mickey Mantle, a Willie Mays, a Sandy Koufax, go on, and Albert Pujols, go on and on and on. The broadcast crew is the team for most people because the team itself, you're rooting for the laundry. If you started watching at 8 and you get to be 50 and you're still a fan of the sport, it's laundry. It's the broadcasters that you hear from the time you start and going on. So there you go. That's my answer to the question, and it was a very good one, and I did it for 34 minutes. All right, talk to you the next time. Have a good one, everybody.